Morning. Today is Friday, 17th of November. This is a meeting of the Act 47 Building Energy Code Study Committee. So we are making our way along, editing and our draft report. And today, one of the things we'd like to do is, besides discussing some of the items in the report, is helping capture a sense of where the group is as a whole. So we'll do some sort of quick polling as we go through. It's just to capture quantitatively so that someone reading the report will have a sense of how many people are supporting a particular strategy versus something else. And whatever the something else is, the report will accommodate that by minority report or dissenting opinion, whatever we call it in the end, so that the report reflects the range of views. People will have quantitative sense of where we are as a group. And to help us get started, I just wanted to do a little housekeeping. So first we have minutes from the last meeting. And I wanted to ask if we're this meeting number 7, which was on October 31st. Does anyone have edits for those minutes? Seeing none, would someone offer a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Any further discussion on minutes? Okay. All those in favor of approval of minutes for meeting number 7, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Nay? Okay. Ayes have it. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Yeah, and now we'll do it's been helpful to keep track because we have people in the room, people online, lots of little tiny tiles, but I'm not necessarily sure who's who. So again, just jump right in. I'll read through. Ted Brady.
Here.
Thank you. Jim Bradley.
He just texted me that he's in the middle of a concrete pour. So Colin will be intermittently, they have a way of communicating with each other so they know which one's actually active.
So I'm Jim Bradley is here on the phone right now, but I am watching concrete get poured. So
Yeah, just in time before the snow flies. Okay.
exactly.
Chris Burns
Here.
and Matt Pushy. Bob Duncan.
Here.
Chris Anthony.
Here.
Scott Campbell. Mike DeRocher. Do we have you from the road? Okay, so we have your colleague, Robert.
Yeah, I'm here. He just texted me and said he was having trouble hearing. I don't know if there's a way that we can move the speaker maybe closer to the chairman. I don't know. Maybe it's his connection. He's in Georgia. So
I'll try to speak up a little better.
okay, perfect.
There's a volume.
The microphone.
Senator, this is Mike. I can hear Kelly real well, but I can't hear you when you speak, sir.
Okay.
It's because I'm loud.
I can hear this now.
All right, great. Actually, I was looking down at the list, so let me get my head up towards the mic and maybe that will let me know if it's still too quiet. Karen Horn. Or Tim Perrin.
Tim Perrin is here. Karen Horn will not be joining us this morning.
Okay, great. Kelly here. Matt is right there. Matt Musgrave. Craig, you just got on. Matt Sharp, I see you front and center. Jason, there you are. Sandy, you're in the room. Okay, so Walt Adams. This is on. Andrew Brewer. Tom Bursey. Ben Civiletti.
I'm here.
Elchkowski? She may be this week. Richard, right next to me, Michelle Farnham. Barry Murphy,
I'm
Thanks.
here.
thank you, and Stu Slope.
Here.
We also have,
Anyone that I didn't call a name out?
yeah, there's Colin Frisbee.
Okay.
Peter Tucker.
Morning, Peter. Anyone else?
Keith Levinson. Oh, right.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Sorry about that.
I forgot myself.
Anyone else? Okay,
There's one other phone number that's showing up beyond Michael. I don't know if that person can say who they are.
can you get the digits of the phone number?
802.
578-5007.
That's me, Jim Bradley.
Oh, sorry, Jim. Right.
No problem.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Massively helpful to someone doing minutes to do the roll call. With that, so we have a draft report. And I don't know if any, I just wanted the copy I have, and let me check with you since you are ground zero for versions of the report. Mine is dated 11/9/23.
That's the one we're working from.
Yeah, great. Very reassuring. We are the same version. And then we also have distributed folks a chart with features that are in the report that we're talking about, just informally moving through them and quantifying them. We'll have some discussion on some of the items, but again, the point is just to let people know where the group is at. And also want to just talk a little bit about going forward. I'll come back to this at the other end of the meeting, but so there's a final meeting on the 28th. That is, at that point, we'll have a final draft, and all we're looking for really is point edits or oopses, or if there's a statement that you feel is really problematic, flag that down, but we'll be beyond wordsmithing at that point. It'll just be, do we have either something missing that we inadvertently, is there an oops, or is there something that's in there that you say that's actually a problem for you in some way? And then we can capture that in an appendix that will have additional information, minority reports, etc. I also just want to pause to say in appreciation that when we started out on all this, I didn't know quite how much we would take in. And I would say we had a buffet line with a lot of items on it, and we have loaded our plates with a lot of things to work through. And not everything in here is going to be turning into a legislative action. I mean, there's a lot of suggestions that aren't necessarily legislative items, but it's really, I think, going to be helpful to people working on this to have all this information pulled together in one place. I expect that this report will end up informing, be confident, not just this legislative session where I can see us make a step or two, but then in subsequent years, there's going to be more scaffolding to build around the program. We'd like to see question who's playing what roles and how fast we get there. Okay, so I'm going to go to the anyone have any comments, questions? Yes.
I'm wondering whether we should put the matrix that we're talking about up on the screen so that we can all focus there.
I should be able to
I
do
have it
that.
up.
Oh, you do.
That'd be good if you're taking notes.
Actually, can you? Oh,
You want me to do it?
Untouched. Yes, can you do it? I want to have my report.
Sure.
This is the
The
1116
clean.
version.
Clean.
I'll share the one that I have. It may not be.
Except you can.
The draft board was the November 9th version.
Of the report, which version of the chart or the
There were
The
two that
matrix.
I sent out yesterday, one that was marked up and one that had all. the
1116 clean.
16?
Mike Rusher, while we're getting that chart up on the screen, wish you and your family a really happy wedding.
Yes. Sorry, we're interfering with your family plans.
Yeah.
So while we're doing that, maybe I'll just sort of bring everybody up to speed in terms of how we got to this chart. And we felt like we needed a process today to allow us to get through all of the recommendations, since we're going to want to record those in the report. So I think the goal, really the primary goal of today, is to get through each one of these recommendations and quantify the support, the opposition, and then capture the dissenting points. I don't think we have time to wordsmith what the dissenting opinions are today, but for those dissenters, if we could get something on specific language that you'd want included in the report, the next version of this we have to have out the end of the day on Tuesday to everybody, to give you enough time to review that before the meeting on the 28th, right? And Thanksgiving's in between there too. So so the time is short. So we won't spend today wordsmithing the dissenters' opinions, but I would say if we could get something from you by the end of the day on Monday on any dissenting opinions, then Liz and I can put that in the report on Tuesday, so that goes out by the end of the day on Tuesday. And so we basically took the table that was in the executive summary of the 11.9 draft and expanded it by adding a couple columns and trying to also clarify some of the language in there. And reviewing that table, it wasn't there was a duplication of a couple of the recommendations, so we combined those together. There was some additional clarification needed about what some of the shorthand text meant, and so we brought the language there. But the main change we made was to add columns for the responsible entity. So that'd be who owns this recommendation. And there'll be some discussion about that as we go through it. And there's some question mark. There's 5 question marks as well too, because in this exercise we realized that we hadn't, as a committee, talked about who owns some of these things. So that's important. And the other point was too, to note the funding source. And for some of these, there's already some funding that's been allocated. So for those who had concerns about paying for some of this, if there's budget already appropriated for it, then maybe that issue goes away and you can be supportive of it, or however that works. But we felt like those would be sort of 2 additional points of clarification that we added to this. So hopefully that will help us move through this. This morning we also talked about and I'm not quite sure where we ended up with flagging this, but it may be that we take the results of the vote of the votes here and break it out between those recommendations that the legislature can deal with and those that are sort of nice to have, or that others can pick up and run with, or that may be already in place and just need a little bit of moral support to move forward, whatever it may be. But really sort of focusing on what are the recommendations that we think the legislature should take on and carry and move forward. And so I don't know, Senator, if we want to ask that question with each one of these
Sure.
as well too, or at least keep that in mind. We went through it initially and sort of thought that there's some that made sense, but I think it'd probably be good for at least run those by the committee as well.
Also, let's talk for a moment about funding source. So, I mean, we haven't spent much time on that one because it's not really an assigned task to find the funding for all this, but it's great that 4 things that are already covered, are already listed. What was your thinking around including funding source? Just in part to highlight when we don't have one?
Yes, I think it's really to look at where are there blank cells? And that's where we're going to need to think about where the funds come
And just because even though I serve 2 doors down from the appropriations committee, I never assume anything about what we do in committee and how it's going to, what it will look like by the time it gets out of appropriations. So I think, it's helpful for us to highlight where the holes are. If people have thoughts they want to share around funding or something that's suitable, I think it's fine, but I wouldn't want us to slow down too long on it because other people will end up,
Yes, I would envision that we're going to fill in those blanks today, but I think it's important to know where there is already allocated funding.
Yeah.
So,
okay. All right, any other questions, comments? Yeah, Kelly.
So just on that, for funding source, if it's a legislative item, is it just like legislatively decided, or is that also in addition to that, like legislative decided, but there might be suggestions like permit fees, or I just want to be clear what we're,
Yeah, thanks.
What we're
So,
saying.
yeah, if people have a lot of experience in this area. So if you say, this reminds me of something else, and permit fees would seem like a natural fit, then yeah, let's capture that while we go. Because appropriations is generally just looking at general funds. And we have to work with other committees if it's going to be a fee, we're going to go over the finance side of things. So I'm happy let's capture ideas while we go. People may have suggestions that make sense to them about how you would fund it. And it is pretty true that if you don't, most of the time, unless their grant money's available, pay your own way.
I would just, I know it's a lot of work and it's a big bar to get there, but there's a lot of federal money available for code compliance work that's out there as well too. So we have some of it in hand. There's a lot more that's out there as well.
Thanks for that. And the other quick thing is I've had 3 days conversations about the coming session, and one of the things that's come up in each meeting is there's still unprecedented levels of federal money available. Do we have enough staff in order to be able to both pull down, to make the application, pull money down, and then to implement once the money is available? And so one of my questions was, do those grants allow for administrative costs, a percentage to go to administration? I think, as best I understand the answer, yes. So they could be very wise investments. Finding staff, I'm starting to sound a little political here, that they may well be cost-effective investments to find people to help bring the money in that will then help run the program itself. Where of things, it seems to fit, but
Just 2 things, just so we don't get stuck. It may be that, like, if it seemed, because what you've just framed, I think makes sense. But I could also see us start going down the rabbit hole of thinking, like, what does that permitting fee structure look like?
Sure.
Exactly. What are the rate, and so there are actually probably going to be like other committees that are going to need to be structured to actually go do the deep dive into that. So I guess I would just ask the group, is it okay if we just identify the possible options here, but not necessarily, we're not committing to them, right? So
yeah, right.
and then-
Absolutely.
and
This is like capture some ideas from people who have experience
Yeah.
while we're working.
And then but I just know there are some people here representing people who are going to be on the hook with these fees if this goes forward, and they're going to have reasonable concerns and all of this. So I just, the other thing I was just going to mention is in my experience with some of the state agencies, they have been turning away federal funds, especially large ones, because they don't feel like they have the administrative capacity in the management offices. So I think one of the things I would just recommend that we also do is potentially call out, maybe it is a statewide applied for fund, but it may be another like NGO partner or something that could actually handle the administration. Try to take the pressure off those state offices and trying to hire people for those. So anyway, not trying to get this is, I don't know if that's political or not, but that may be just something that we just kind of acknowledge.
Well, it would seem a shame if there's a resource we can use for that.
Yep.
And if the resource can pay for not only the work, but the administration of that work.
Yep.
And I hate to see us sit it out, or at least should flag the opportunity. So Richard and Kelly.
I just want to remind folks that the phase 2 of this work that we're doing is this DOE grant that we have. And we have 3 years of funding to help us flesh out all those details that you just mentioned, Chris. So I see that as the opportunity. And I would also want to say part of that is maintaining or managing an advisory committee. And we envision offering this committee as an ongoing advisory committee for that effort as well too. So there's possibility of carrying forward for those that are interested in playing that role and supporting that follow-on implementation work as part of that DOE grant, which presumably will start in January. We're not quite there yet.
Just in response to Chris, I just want to make the statement that the department is applying for any and all formula grants that have been announced, but we do not have the resources for any competitive grants. So just throwing that out there generally with what you said and to make it clear. So folks know that we are going through for anything that's formula, but not competitive. We don't have the staff resources to do that.
Okay. Right. So I'm going to use our committee member list from page 2 of the report as for our roll calls on these things. Since we have a mixture of people in the room and online. So I'll jump right into box A1 under.
Would it be just a suggestion? Yeah, go ahead, Chair. How about if we ask for votes of the committee members? And my presumption is that most will be in favor of many of these, but we record those who vote no.
Okay.
And assume that the rest are supportive
Or
abstentions or no's. It might just help us without having to do a roll call.
Yeah.
Everyone.
We are a pretty big group.
We are.
Okay. I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you. So we'll
just
work our way through. If you want to abstain or vote no, sounds so negative, but offer an alternative.
Dissent.
We'll say dissent. Then speak up and we'll note it, and then we'll try to capture in very brief form what the dissenting idea is, knowing that you'll be submitting something in writing for incorporation into the report. Thanks, Richard.
Could I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, Craig?
Craig, yes. Thanks, Senator. Richard, when you sent out the first poll, I think some of these I had different opinions on if it was 24 or phase 2 than this consensus opinion. That's probably, maybe that's too grant. We're on the other side of that now. I'm probably happy to vote for the ones that are in 24 where I had them in phase 2. So are we just on the other side of that? Or do you want to, I don't know that it, I don't know how much you want to make note of that or how much that matters.
Well, I think we should put the terms of time frame. Let's see. Let me address the survey first. The survey was helpful for us to sort of gauge general interest, but we determined that it could not be used as an official vote. We need to do that in a public forum.
Right.
That's what we're doing today. So, so put your votes on the survey behind you and focus on what's here. You raise a good point about whether something, I mean, if somebody feels like the checkbox should be in phase 2 and not 2024, maybe we note that now.
Yeah, and I mean, if the majority agrees, I think we can change it. Like,
Yeah.
I have
Right.
wording suggestion changes for something. So I
Okay.
think we should not just vote, but we should discuss
Okay.
the recommendations. That's my,
Yeah, and the 2024 versus phase 2 is really helpful in terms of for people getting a report. It helps set expectations for goals for like, well, what do we want to get done this session? And what do we know is a bigger project without losing it just because it's not for the immediate session in front of us. Okay, so A1, most significant immediate structural change that can be made to positively impact Vermont's energy code environment. Designate the Department of Fire and Safety as the statewide authority over all building construction, public, private, commercial, and residential. That was a recommendation for 2024. So let's capture dissenting opinions. And Matt?
So I'm kind of a no with an asterisk on this and a question mark at the same time. The reason why currently I'm at a no status with this is, number one, I'm listening to the agency say that I can't do this, and I'm fearful about setting someone up for failure. I have major concerns. If you take a moment and go look at the state of Vermont jobs list, you'll find that all departments are hiring right now, and they're all competing with each other. They're all desperate for a limited resource. So that's one side of it. Is I'm listening to what the department's saying. I personally don't have any skin in the game as to which department or agency holds it. So it's not a political play, but they're saying no. But then on the other side of it, where my opinion comes into it a little bit more, or AGC's opinion comes into it a little bit more, is does this mean if DFS says yes, if admin agrees, if you all vote that way, does this indicate that we're taking away from OPR, meaning there'll be a single authority having jurisdiction over those builders? Because I see a major problem with having jurisdiction from both agencies. And in fact, the residential contractor registry was written with that contemplated, in that you would not be required to register with OPR if you were an electrical licensee or a plumber, or you're under the authority of another jurisdiction. So is 1A inclusive of removing the authority from OPR and handing it over to a single point source? Because I think for the industry, it's absolutely unfair to have two masters per se, if that makes sense.
So on both points, it is some good common sense points to keep in mind. I mean, I think we've talked about it, and I've always tried to do this as a legislator. When we talk about programs, never ask any operating area to just take on more work without staff. Where politics can actually, to be frank about it, where politics can intrude with different administrations over different times have feelings about hiring or not hiring. So sometimes they don't want to see any new hires, and so they don't want to bring people on. So we can say we would like to provide you new staff, but if the administration says thanks but no thanks, then we're kind of stuck at that point. But at least both sides are saying what they think makes sense, and it's for us to sort out. So thanks.
So that's just that procedural side, is are we able to do it? And then the other side of it is, I think, it would be relevant, and you could probably have us come over to a yes if we weren't having multiple jurisdictional authorities.
Fragmented authority that we have now as part of what really precipitated.
Are you taking comments now about funding or just dissenting?
Well, let's do the dissenting first, and then if we bought funding comments, So we got Matt Musgrave's remarks. Anyone else want to offer something? Kelly?
The department will be a dissenter. We do not feel that this is the time to increase housing costs, and our preference is to focus on compliance and compliance activities versus enforcement and building that enforcement foundation. So that's us.
Anyone else want to offer? Yeah, Chris?
So I appreciate your perspective on what you offered. I am okay as not being a dissenter, as long as we're really saying what we're saying here, which is designate DFS as a statewide authority over all building construction. To my mind, that's the separation between Secretary of State regulating professions and licensure, that kind of thing, versus who's actually looking what's going on in the buildings, how the code's being applied, because Secretary of State's office doesn't have any capacity or knowledge to do that. So I read that more narrowly, but I totally get your.
Well, DFS actually does manage licenses, so that is something that they already do.
Okay, all right.
That's the plumber's licenses, your fire and safety, and your electrical licenses. So this would just be moving the my suggestion is just moving the licensure over. They still have the same authority, including fraud.
Got it.
Dissenting ideas to share?
I don't have a dissenting idea, but I think for me, an underlying premise is that anything that we propose presumes that there is ability to fund or ability to enact. That it's not like we're saying it's going to happen and we don't care, it's going to happen without. So there needs to be. I think that's understood by everybody, right? That something has to work in order for it to actually be accomplished.
My code for the last 8 years has a big button on it says yeah.
Yeah.
Chair, I have a comment if I could.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that Efficiency Vermont is choosing to abstain from this vote. We just don't feel it's our position to comment on matters that are clearly up to the state to decide how to organize themselves.
Okay, thanks for that. Kelly?
Given that Mike DeRocha is on the road, he did send, are you trying to say something, Mike? I was gonna read your comments that.
It's just, there's a delay in like unmuting myself and so forth, and a lot of road noise, so.
Okay, Michael, I was gonna read the comments that you sent, or you can just speak for yourself, whichever works better for you.
Yeah, just to be transparent with the committee, I did send my responses in writing, and Bob Sponabar, Deputy Director, also has them, and he's on the meeting. But I just want to be on the record of opposing this section here for some of the reasons that have already been stated. But I also want to express the fact that public service already administers the energy efficiency rules. And I also think there's a lot more to just taking licensing from a program that's not even established and moving that over to fire safety. The programs that I manage right now and for which we have our boards, not only do we manage the licensing, we manage the inspection process, the mentoring process. We also manage all the continuing ed and approve all the continuing ed classes. And I think in the private sector right now, there's enough national third-party certifications that exist already. So somebody could piggyback off those national certifications and use some existing platforms that are already out there. I'm just going to emphasize we have zero bandwidth to take on additional duties, including rulemaking and adding more to our licensing. So I just want to, the narrative is there, and Kelly or Bob, if either one of you want to read it specifically in detail, that's fine with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Scott?
That brings up something that I don't think actually is captured in this matrix that we talked extensively about, was a recommendation to convene another study group to talk about residential building code. Right. And I wonder if there's any place we should be putting that somewhere.
Especially if this is going to the legislature.
Right.
Recommendation.
Right.
Yeah, so let's pause because we've talked about that off and on, knowing that it's like a multi-year transition. And there's a lot of parties that need, just like we've been sorting things out a lot in these meetings, it's going to be sorting for years to come and things evolve. So let's just pause and pull on that. Like, are people interested in having a study, a recommendation for a study committee that will help continue to work on this? It might have a composition much like this group. Anyone think that's not a worthwhile recommendation?
Can we go to Michael on the phone first? Michael, did you hear the question? Because I think you spoke on this before about having a study group.
Kelly,
to look
can
at
you
a
repeat
residential
that
building code.
question? I'm sorry, can you repeat
The question is whether there should be a study group on a residential building construction code.
Right, I'm running a housing study in parallel with this energy efficiency study here. And the recommendation that's going to come out of that S100 housing study is going to be to put together a study group to look at the impact of the IRC on the cost of housing, also how that impacts our current code development process and our strategy that we have in place right now to prevent loss of life and fires. So there's definitely a need to study whether we adopt the IRC or not, and that's going to be coming out of the housing study.
So maybe that dovetails with this and it would just be part of that, of a larger discussion. Does that sound right to you? The question for a study group might be broader than just the RSC cost implications, like coordination between operating areas.
I think there's also the concern of whether our contractors and builders have the capacity to comply with the provisions of the IRC. There's also provisions in the IRC that we have to review internally. I'll give you an example: domestic sprinkler systems in 1 and 2 family dwellings. It would also pick up the ADUs. And so what is fire safety going to do with the 1 and 2 family sprinkler requirement? There's a lot of stuff that we need to look at.
Thank you. So anyone think that a study group, a recommendation include a working group akin to what Mike's talking about, but I think broader than just that, IRC? Anyone want to dissent that that's not a useful recommendation?
Right. I'm not opposed if we do a work group, and if the work group decides that we can methodically go through a process and adopt the IRC. I'm not opposed to it. There's a lot more to this process and the structure of adopting the IRC that just meets the eye.
Okay, great. Fair enough. Makes sense.
Thanks.
No, go ahead, Matt.
Well, Sandy, you've been waiting.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead. please.
Well, actually, I would like to hear what Matt says first and then speak.
Thank you. Wow. No, so that was, my reaction when we had originally started having these conversations about the building code and such. I was actually in support of studying it and coming back next year to do so. And I think Mike mentioned some of the implications that I brought up before: capacity, ability, and the different pieces of it. So as long as it's clear and that we're recommending a study group, and not recommending someone write a bill that we're going to introduce that right away, we would be supportive of a study group and love to participate.
Okay, so now shifting, that's great. We had talked about making a sister bill because we recognize that that was kind of beyond the scope of this committee. I think we should check with the builders, but a study group would be an excellent way to move forward. I want to make sure this group knows that there is a BRIC grant, which is a FEMA grant available, which allots $2 million to every state. So it's not even competitive for that $2 million. And it's specifically to establish building codes. And it includes administration and it includes training. It's a really large umbrella. I mean, like, and it can be designed by the state of what they'd like. They need to have a letter of intent from our state chief hazard officer and any entity that might be interested. We were discussing this at Build Safe last week or yesterday. And so just having that in any recommendation we make is a helpful first step. It could be flagged in the letter of intent and show that there's some direction in Vermont. There's a huge amount of hope that Vermont will move that in that direction from the insurance companies and from FEMA. So this is part of a bigger movement, and I think a study committee would be an excellent first step. Do builders, Jim?
When is that letter due?
Yeah.
February 1st.
Hey, Sandy,
Sorry, the $2 million is the beginning. We can actually apply for more than that. The rest is competitive. Mike?
Can you
Mike?
hear me?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Along with the IRC study, this doesn't mean that I'm supporting the extension of our authority in the single family owner occupied homes. I'm simply stating that we are willing to participate in a study to look at the IRC, but by no means am I putting some blanket approval of extending this into 1 and 2 or single family owner occupied homes.
Okay.
I think that's above my pay grade. That is a legislative issue that'll have to be hashed out.
Okay.
This is Jason. I as Mike said, I agree that if there's a study group, it needs to go, with all due respect to Mike and DFS, it needs to zoom out a little bit to be looking at the IRC, application of IRC to single family homes in a much broader sense than the historic kind of more narrow lens that DFS has had with their review. They certainly are the Division of Fire Safety. And the IRC is more, it's broader than that. It's structural characteristics. It's framing details. And so if there's, as Mike said, if there is a study, our report should word that the study may actually be broader than what historically DFS has done for their review for the codes that they oversee.
That was my sense.
That's a fair statement.
Okay. Great.
So a question, if we're going to adopt a recommendation that we have a study group to look at residential building codes, does it make this provision we're discussing moot? Because essentially DFS is already oversees building construction for commercial, for everything but residential in that list.
No, I think that first one's really critical.
But I'm not sure what it's saying if we have dissenters who are opposed to the use of the word residential in there. And if we're at the same time parallel saying we should adopt a committee to review residential, the necessity for or residential building
No, no,
codes.
I think that we want to establish the authority and then that is looking at how it would be structured.
Yeah, I'm hearing dissenting from Mike about accepting authority for residential. So we could certainly, as a majority, if there is a majority, say that we want that, but it almost seems like those two are competing with each other to me.
You might find, and I'm not making any, guarantees, you might find that it's a really good idea, but you might also find that it might not work. So I think that's the purpose is what does that look like in Vermont, notwithstanding the opposition to that piece? Because I think it might be a little bit, they're connected, but you might also learn stuff in the study group that would either motivate you or less motivate you to move forward in that direction.
I mean, the IRC, you're talking about thousands of single-family homes being constructed, and you're talking about the administration of permitting and inspection on single-family owner-occupied homes. I mean,
No,
that's a.
No, we're not.
I mean, that's a big deal. When a lot of towns don't even have zoning administrators.
No,
So
And so forth.
we're only at A1, which is, so how about this? Well, so A1, we captured dissenting opinions in brief, and people are going to submit stuff. Scott mentioned the idea of recommending a study group, and we've talked about that different times. So is it fair for us to say people are supportive of a study group, and we want to acknowledge that it's broader than the IRC question that also came out of housing bill. And my sense is that people are drawn to the idea of a comprehensive look. And we don't know in the real world, as Matt's saying, you could find that it would be great to have sort of one-stop shopping, a single place that managed everything. We might also end up finding that it was impractical, wasn't implementable at this time, something like that. But we just want to make sure that the recommendation for a study group, that their purview is broad enough that it's beyond just IRC, so we can.
We're not talking about getting rid of A1.
No, I think
Because-
This is an additional thing.
Because
So-
we've talked about examples of other states that have an authority, but there is no inspection or enforcement. And that seems to be a model. That's in the study group.
That's right.
But I think we have to figure out the authority part. It's key to do that now.
I'm hearing qualifications about concerns what a study group might recommend and how implementable it is. But I'm not hearing anyone say, let's not have a study group that can carry on, because we know this is not a one and done. Okay.
No dissent.
All right, no dissent on that one. So with
Look at
that. we're gonna go to-
And by the way, I have, just so you know, I've
Yeah.
emailed Stephanie Smith with Vermont Emergency Management to ask if they did in fact considering applying for that 2 million brick
Oh,
funding
good point.
and reference the study that BFS is doing in this recommendation we had. So hopefully there'll be some coordination with
Yeah.
whatever.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yep.
A2, clarify the chain of authority from the General Assembly through DFS to municipalities. So pause there. In a certain way, there already is that's the lay of the land, right? And writing statute, and it flows down to all of the agencies and to municipalities. So can someone speak a little bit more about what we're clarifying there?
I can, I'm sorry, I'm confused. Did we approve as a group A1 with dissenters?
Yes.
Thank you. So this comes out of concerns raised by the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission last year. Their lawyers said that there's a missing link in existing statute. And I have done everything I could to try to clarify that. Basically, no one can make a legal opinion. So we don't have the tools to say what, so I named the 4 statutes that are related that I could find. And what evidently there's no link for variances and enforcement. So there's no authority chain between a municipality up to the legislature. There's pieces in the stat. For instance, there's more around housing conditions, like living conditions for apartments, but there's not for structural, there's enough for structural failures. So that all this is saying is that needs to be examined by legal experts, and any links need to be fixed.
This is,
And it's
is
case,
it going to be in your, AIA supplement to the report? I know that
It is.
You've got a lot of additional.
it is, and it's actually in the 11-9 draft. It's in the official draft right now.
So I just want to point out the language in the report right now says, this committee recommends increasing the MOU provision in DFS statute to include oversight of municipality administration to owner occupied single family homes. That's what the words say. I want to be clear about before we go to a vote.
Right.
To my,
It seems a little different than what I just heard Sandy.
to my mind, A2 is what's needed before we get to what's in the report. That clarity of authority before, so I guess, is what I'm saying not making sense?
A1 is what we know.
A2, that the language in the A2 recommended, the chart
Yeah.
makes more sense to me than what's.
In
what you
the
just read.
narrative.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's why there's, I think, saying two different things on what was just said. That's why I wanted to point it out.
I responded to this, I think in the survey, that if you changed it from through DFS to through AHJ, I probably could support that, because if we're recommending 2 and no one's voted for A, we're gonna lose 2 at the same time. So would it make more sense that we get rid of the responsible entity, and currently the responsible entity is PSD? If the legislature chooses to move that over, then that just changes the AHJ in clause 2. Does that make sense?
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Just so we don't lose that initiative if we don't get.
Changing DFS and A2 to AHJ
Correct.
to make the decision or not. And close that. Whoever ends up with the responsibility, clarity, sort of chain of command stuff that we talked about ought to be clear for everyone, as opposed to somewhat gappy. Okay. Is that an edit that anyone who's it's making?
Mr. Chair, this is Ted Brady from the league.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Sorry, I saw your hand and then lost it.
No, I don't fully actually understand what we're saying here. Currently, so if I think I heard Sandy say that currently there is a legal question whether a municipality could exercise the authority to enforce the energy code on single family homes because the DFS currently does not have that authority itself. Is that what I heard you say, Sandy?
according to my understanding from the Regional Planning Commission, there is a question of authority for municipalities to enforce either commercial or residential in their, if they create an ordinance that they can't enforce it.
Right. At the league, we haven't heard that complaint from our members. I looked to Chris and
Was South
Gopta.
Burlington was the,
Ted, I would talk to Taylor Newton at Chittenden County.
that's right. It was him. Excuse me.
So this is Mike. We do have authority to grant inspection authority to municipalities through 20 VSA, but those agreements are only for those buildings defined as a public building. And then we tailor those specific MOUs to fulfill the request of the local municipality. But we don't extend that inspection or enforcement into single-family owner-occupied homes or farms or non-public buildings. I just wanted to offer that for clarification.
And that's a great example. South Burlington has an MOU with DFS, so they can enforce all of the building codes, but they cannot enforce the building energy code because DFS doesn't enforce the building energy code.
That's correct. That would be my, unless the city of Burlington somehow has an ordinance or some other governing system in place to enforce them, but we're certainly not handing that down to South Burlington.
I think the question before us, right, is clarifying what this relationship is, what authorities exist. So that's the discrete question, right? That I didn't hear any dissent.
So, then we're modifying DFS, that whoever the authority having jurisdiction is, that there should be clarity so that we don't end up with gaps in what can be without rules and regulating. Any dissent on that recommendation? I don't doubt that we will want to get more clarity about what's working and not working in that relationship. Is Ben equipped to look into that at all for us?
Equipped to look into what?
Well, the discussion we're having, and it's in the draft report, it's on page 12, there's a section on it. I think what I'm saying is, has Ben looked at this to vet it for legal accuracy on behalf of the committee?
Are we talking about A2?
Yes, and then in the text report, it's basically, it appears on page 12. There's quite a bit of text there. And, since we're citing statute, et cetera, it would just feel like, to me, like it'd be helpful to have a committee lawyer looking over our shoulder and saying, hey, you got the right stuff, and you haven't omitted something that you would want to include because it's also relevant to it, that kind of.
Mine is on page 10.
Okay.
Is that definitely referring?
Yes, I have the special Mac edition, which is page 12.
Mine is on page 12 as well.
It says in bold at the top, there is no clear chain of authority from the General Assembly. Okay. Right.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm being asked a
Yeah.
question, but I have not had an opportunity or been asked to review anything in the report from a legal perspective. Certainly could take a look at that. If that would be helpful.
Would be helpful. I'm going to figure whenever we're going to get into studying the law, good to have a lawyer who knows Vermont statute helping us look through. Thank you. Okay, so A3, amend the energy code update cycle by changing shall in the energy code to enable the statute to may. So I think that's in part what we were struggling with in LCAR last summer. And so I won't opine. Anyone want to dissent on that recommendation? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and say that the bill having drafted includes that provision. So, yeah. Well, getting ready for January 6th or whatever it is, 7th, 8th, somewhere in there. It's not far away.
Is that the Senate draft deadline?
Our drafting deadline is number 1.
Oh, okay.
You know, everything's subject to editing in committee. I want to have an oar in the water for us to pull on. Yeah, Chris.
A brief note, I just heard back from Stephanie and no, the state is not applying for that brick funding of building.
So, and did you, or Chris or Sandy, do you know who it is that's legally allowed to apply? Like what kind of entity has to?
It's similar to the FEMA grant. And so we briefly discussed this at the Field Safe Committee meeting. International Code Council is willing to throw a lot of assistance in to help Vermont get through this hurdle. And I believe that it's structured that an NGO can
I'm not sure.
it has to have a relationship.
Keep on the recommendations.
Yeah, let's not go there because I'm not sure that's correct. So let's.
Yeah. So I'm writing next to it.
I don't know.
Find out.
Yeah.
Thank you. Time for everyone. Okay, so great. We're on that A4, establish an advisory committee to help with future code revisions, examine building failure cases to improve building science and future codes.
This is Mike.
Yes, Mike, go ahead.
Pertaining to the code adoption cycle, I would defer that to public service, but I will add this. Sometimes from a technology perspective or emerging issues and trends, it's good to update the codes. Typically it's like a 3-year cycle. However, the comments I've heard out of this group, based on some feedback from constituents, was folks are struggling now to comply with the current provisions of the CBs and RBs. So they're wanting to put a pause on this until they can come up to speed on how best to comply. I guess you all are using the word building science, right? So that's why I defer to public service and the experts on this particular stuff. Fire safety, we're way behind on adopting and staying up with the most current code, but we are moving forward, hopefully, with adopting the 21 codes. But we need to do this because you have innovations in gas systems, gas piping, oil heating technology, all this stuff, and the industry is looking for us and energy storage systems, and the list goes on, and they're looking for us to be the leaders to give them the standards in which they have to build to. So anyway, but as far as energy efficiency, I'm going to defer to public service on it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. If someone asked me outside the scoop to characterize this one, it'd be like, if we're having trouble meeting the bar currently, let's not necessarily raise the bar and without having means in place to help meet the current code more broadly. And
I think the other issue is once you get into exceeding the national standards and you start amending the national standards and you start going beyond those national standards, I think that complicates that process even further unless you have really a solid training and education program to bring those contractors up to speed before those new standards are actually adopted and put into and come out with an effective date.
Sure. Okay. Right. The other thing to me that we saw was that all the instances of failure were under the pre-existing code. It wasn't that we stepped up to a higher code and they precipitated the failures. It was the failures under building science failures under the existing code. So, anyway.
So if this is Jason again, if we as a group feel, our recommendation is to change the the enabling legislation going forward from shall to may. And we also feel, like we've just talked, is that, we're not meeting the current code. Why do we keep raising the bar on ourselves? Currently, LCAR has already approved a new revision to the energy code. So if the enabling this is a legal question, if the enabling legislation is changed before the adoption date of the new version of the code, is the AHJ, be it DFS or DPS, and LCAR able to stop the enaction of that next code? Or is that something that the legislature has to specifically do, which is not there? I assume there won't be much appetite for that.
Great question. In statute trumps rule, and so the reason that we pushed all the way off to July 1 of 2024 was so there would be a full legislative session in between to be able to take what we learn out of this group and then enact legislation. So if we were to make that change, then it would we would want to speak to the point on what happens with the code. But we have an opportunity to, in an orderly way, address any kind of code change by doing it through statute, which will then overrule. Yeah.
I just want to say the department supports changing the legislation or the statute from shall to may. However, we are not at this point considering that would change our adoption of the existing update. We would plan to go forward with that unless told otherwise in legislation. Just want to make sure it's clear.
Yeah, right. The default is what
and
voted.
I'll point out as well that the department desires change of the shall to a may additionally because we do have in our comprehensive energy plan needing a net zero ready by 2030. And after that point, we don't know how much it would progress and would like the flexibility to not have to update it every 3 years if it's not warranted as well. So it's on that other side as well, not.
The recommendation for net zero ready 2030, it's a recommendation. It's not there's a law that says the CUP shall be written and updated, but the recommendations in the CP are legally binding.
Yes.
Right. So if I think we were on A4. I didn't hear anyone dissenting from the notion of having an advisory code that addressed updates.
Actually, I would propose to strike the language to help with future code revisions and leave the rest of the language as is and strike PSD as the responsible entity and include EFG, given that they have funding in their DOE code grant. The PSD does not have the resources to lead these efforts, and it's already in statute that during code updates, the department must establish an advisory committee for those code updates.
Okay, so that's already be done. So it would be establish an advisory committee to examine building failure cases to improve building sciences and codes. That what you're saying.
Excuse me, this suggestion has developed wildly since the November 9th draft. And so it was suggested originally to be an advisory committee to the new authority overall building construction to help with the transition. So it's kind of evolved to something else.
Are you saying it's already captured someplace else?
Well, there is already an advisory committee for future code revisions to PSD.
Yeah.
The idea was to create an advisory committee to fire safety. So
no, Sandy's right. This has changed because that's what it
Right.
was. And
But
presumed that DFS would be that authority having jurisdiction, so.
because it says PSD here. As responsible, it's the idea would be to create an advisory committee to help with this whole transition and also to begin looking at building failure cases. So I just don't I think we're talking about two different things.
And you should say responsible parties again.
Yeah.
I had offered that because, as I said earlier, because we have, as part of this DOE grant, an advisory committee as part of that, I had thought that this committee could transition, for anybody who wanted to continue, into that advisory committee for the DOE grant purposes, but that, you're right, that's different than advising the DFS becoming the HJ. But it seemed like that was presumptuous because that advisory committee wouldn't be formed until the DFS was named as the HJ. So it
might be wise to make a couple of advisory committees then, but
okay.
The idea, I mean, as I understand the builders and the architects, they want to go in the direction of having one authority over all building construction, which would include energy codes. And so there would need to be an advisory committee helping with that.
Should that be added to A1 then, instead of having a whole separate
Does that work?
recommendation? And then if you keep A4, that can be addressed and go forward regardless of DFS being designated.
And what our concern is where something doesn't exist now, we do not want to start sending energy resources people to something that could then be a hindrance to having one authority in the future. So it could make sense to be specific about an advisory committee in A1.
Yeah.
But then, but the main thing that what is in here that I think Kelly's saying, keep some entity to look at building failures. And so,
pregnant, are you? Why does it look like you are?
Be the car ride.
Are you interested in building codes?
And there does need to be, I mean, it makes sense to have it be part of DFS. There needs to be some entity looking at building failures. And
I have a question about, this is in 2024 for phase 2 item.
Well, this DOE grant begins in January 2024, so that's the presumption.
Okay. All right, so then the edit, there are two edits suggested for this one. One is striking help with future energy code revisions, as PSD already has that authority and does that. It becomes established an advisory committee to examine building failure cases and improve building science and future codes. And it's a home for that advisory committee that we don't know, and so we're changing PSD to HJ. That's how I'm editing my chart as I'm listening. Does that sound right? So is there any dissent from capturing that, Kelly?
If it's being funded through EFG's DOE grant, can we have EFG as the responsible entity? So it can happen regardless of a entity being named as AHJ.
In general, we're going to be bringing up that we are uncomfortable with any non-state entity being an ultimate authority. We would like any effort.
Take permanence and
permanent governance, answerability, accountability. It seems, I mean, obviously Vermont depends heavily on EFG. They've been incredible in helping us, but preserving the relationship of being under the direction or under something.
Maybe
the umbrella.
I might be reading this wrong, but I think I like A4. I think it's essentially at the heart of what Richard brought up earlier in the meeting, that those of us that want to move on and do that, but that's not creating any jurisdiction to EFG. That's just, we're going to get together and then we'll come back and bug the legislators about the things that we want.
But I mean, I understand your ability with not having sort of the one-stop shopping home that makes sense from a governance point of view. It feels like that's a stretch at this point, so.
I think we're trying to figure out the long-term structure of things though. And
yeah,
I mean, there needs to be one entity in the state that's looking at building failures and then redirecting it back at what are our building regulations, including energy codes, and how our builders trained. And that needs to be really soon one entity. Because the failures are, they mean, we can't see if they're increasing or not, but they significantly exist.
sure. So does A1 not address that concern? Like that
think
unified command?
It could if it explicitly added that.
Well, it says, statewide authority over all building construction. So that sounds like sort of powerful Colin, the unified command thing that we were talking about.
Right.
Okay.
But we might want to be, I mean, we originally had these as subpoints underneath of it. So the idea would be that it's such an important subpoint that it's actually named.
I think if you removed A4, we could still go forward with that process to begin with anyway, right?
Part of our work plan.
Sounds like the.
Because that's a conversation we'll end up with in committee that people won't be clear as because we're not clear and we've been doing this for 3 months.
Okay, so then, people want to remove the recommended A4 altogether if it's not satisfactory, but it's. I feel like, so let me rephrase it. Sandy, it sounds like you're pushing to make it more explicit and who owns the responsibility. I feel like there's pushback about there's no one sort of willing and able to accept that at this moment. So one way around that is to name the HJ, and it's government as opposed to a contractor. And it does mean it's a deferred decision. But
Keeping it there with
the
AHJ.
idea is captured.
Jim can't really talk because he's doing concrete. So Jason or Colin, is that what keep it in here and just have AHJ?
I mean, why aren't they subs of A1 then?
I mean, it really doesn't.
It could be subs of A1.
I mean, if
That's what we intended.
that's, seems like it's more subs of A1.
So I don't want to get stuck on, we're agreeing we need to study it. How we phrase how the studying happens and who does it is hanging us up a little bit.
Yeah, these are all subs of A, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It's,
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I think we're all set there. I'm not hearing anyone sent over the ideas, an implementation question. Okay, B, approve the process for filing and tracking energy code certificates. So this has been your bailiwick, Kelly, in general, right? So one, establish a statewide central publicly accessible database for all Vermont buildings that includes energy code data. How close are we to having such a thing now? Is there a version of that, but it's not complete, or this envisions a complete? Yes. Right.
This, and I think in the report, in certainly more detail, but I think it envisions building on the system that DFS is currently spending $1 million on the permit system and adding a single family home component That's essentially what
So that's the question again, if for some reason the legislature doesn't agree to A1, what happens to B1 under this recommendation?
Well, and this wouldn't go anywhere without funding attached to it as well, too.
But so Matt, in a way, are you suggesting that DFS should become AHJ?
I mean, similarly to that last section, I think it would make sense because I think that, and that was one of my initial recommendations, was creating a full database. I don't care who does that, but if we set it up to be DHS and they don't become the entity, then we've given a recommendation that has nothing to go, nowhere to go.
That makes sense.
This is Mike.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I don't know how else to chime in. I don't mean to
You're doing it just right.
One of my initial recommendations was that we develop some different swimming lanes for options, which we never ended up doing. I understand you did the matrix and you formulated some different timelines and so forth, but we never established different swimming lanes for different approaches to doing this initiative. And the reason I brought that up was, these are all predicated on everything going to DFS. And if any of these parts do not work out, then where does this leave this whole entire study? So from the onset, I have tried to say, come up with 2-3 different approaches to gaining better compliance with energy efficiency. And that goes back to training, education, and awareness. But I'll just stop right there.
Anyone else want to comment on the notion of a database for tracking?
Where the responsible entity is fire safety.
Well, I guess I agree with what Matt was saying. Why, back to A4 and B1, why isn't responsible entity just titled AHJ? So whoever gets named the AHJ becomes a responsible entity for that. Are we recommending that the AHJ establish a statewide central publicly accessible database for all Vermont buildings that includes energy code?
The answer to that is that DFS is already developing and updating their database for tracking commercial building permits, right? So the idea was to add this on to that. I think.
So
I'm getting a little confused on these changes from DFS to AHJ and what the department and DFS should be dissenting. Like, we obviously don't agree with A1 or anything that falls within A1. So I don't know if I should be saying we now dissent on this, we dissent on A4, we dissent on A1. So I just want to make that clear that, we obviously don't agree with A1 or anything that falls under that or the AHJ.
Well, I think what we're doing here is as a committee, as a study group, we're trying to come back to the legislature to say, do you want more compliance with the energy code? You asked us the question, do you want more compliance with the energy code? And so here are our recommendations if you want more compliance with the energy code, that we're saying there needs to be a singular AHJ, and that I think the majority of the committee feels that all authority has to be under one roof, and it needs to be in one agency, and that we're just going down through a list and saying, if we want more compliance, we probably should develop a statewide database. And who does that? AHJ. Right. I feel like we're so in the minutia of everything that's going to get talked about in nauseam anyway. Like we're kind of like, we're getting lost in the minutia when we need to like pull back here and come back up to 30,000 feet as to what does this group feel are the big broad brush strokes for getting more compliance with the energy codes.
I just wonder if we should simplify it and just have like all these as subs of A1, so they're all packaged together versus, and it's confusing me to have it individually, like I said, what I'm dissenting on or not.
Yeah,
So,
right. Yeah, I mean, there's like a big question up front. Who is the AHJ, right?
Right.
There's a recommendation, go to DFS.
Right.
We know there's complications with all that, but then a lot of things are all flowing, predicated on that. If you had that single entity, like, okay, here are the things that we would want to get done,
Exactly.
and they would all live there.
Right.
But my interpretation of B1 is that it doesn't require DFS to be the AHJ in order for them to expand the database to have this capability, whether they become the AHJ or not. That's how I interpret it.
Well, I think if you set AHJ in that category, it does accomplish the goal whether or not that AHJ is moved, because currently we have AHJ over the registration as OPR, currently AHJ over the implementation and the data keeping is PSD. So if you left it at AHJ and all things stay the same way that it is today, you just have to make a better database.
Yeah, we definitely dissent from that. I'm glad you said that, because that's what I'm getting at. We specifically say in the code, we are not the AHJ. So, and we would not.
But you have a database.
We have a spreadsheet
You have
database.
Excel.
We don't have this. We don't have this
Excel.
$1.5 million that they're doing database. So that, yeah, it's a little squishy here.
And I think it's important to point out that there's some areas of administration that Vermont just doesn't have anywhere in its government right now. So whoever takes it over, it's going to be a cost. And whether it can magically from the tooth fairy of DOE or wherever the money comes from, that we still have that cost. So the idea would be to try to steer it towards the permanent authority so that we don't have to do it twice. So
I wonder if we could word this to say, instead of establish a statewide publicly accessible database, it's for me to say, just reference expanding the DFS's current database update process to include the capability of.
That's what is meant by the recommendation.
That's what I, yeah.
And
Senator Brady Bockel.
no, I'm just in that place of trying to hear everyone at once and look for a way to sort of thread the needle. I mean, the more times we say AHJ, the more times it starts to feel like we're kicking a can down the road.
Yes, we are.
And so,
So I propose that we change B1 to reflect the narrative in draft report. And it would say, instead of establish, it would say expand DFS's current database redesign to include the capability of tracking energy code certificates.
To include the capability means that just if the program does it, it does it, and we're satisfied. It's not a requirement that DFS picks it up.
It's actually collecting
Okay.
certificates at this time.
So
That can be done. But the point that, I mean, if they're programming a new database, let's include that capability.
It's probably got a drop down box already.
No.
Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I apologize for jumping in because I have to unmute and it's just the timing's not good. I don't know how else to do it, but sorry. our database, we already put an RFP out. We've got the responses back. We're working with a vendor right now. This energy efficiency is not in any way part of this, the procurement of this system. And there's no module for it. There's no design parameters or nothing. And in fact, we haven't even selected officially yet the vendor. And in my narrative that I submitted early this morning, we are challenged with the existing cost of this system already. And so I just want to be transparent with the group, not just pointing a finger saying, we'll just tackle this onto this new platform. The optics of it may seem easy, but we are not remotely there yet, even selecting our vendor. I just want to be clear to everybody.
Well, so acknowledging that you already have a bid out, there's already a system being developed. Are you anticipating having an ongoing relationship with that vendor for possible future enhancements plus, maintenance, stuff like that?
We intend on staying with the vendor we select. That is accurate. We do intend on staying with this IT vendor once we select one.
We
have no funding to do any additional IT work through ADS with this system as it sits now. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. This is Jason again. I guess I may actually be inserting I disagree with B1 now, because I'm just starting to think now about why isn't, can anybody tell me any other like certification that goes from a contractor to a client that gets recorded at the state? Right? Like when I next week have Jackman Fuels coming to certify that my newly installed gas lines pass a leak check, that's between me and, Jackman's has to do it. It's part of their insurance and their licensure, but they don't then turn around and file a document at the state. And so I'm thinking out loud here, is that maybe the recommendation is that why are RB certificates filed period at the state level?
So Jason,
clearly there's no database for it. Clearly Kelly they've been doing nothing but entering it into an Excel document. Mike saying there's no room for it in their current thing. Like what other things are filed like that in state databases?
So Jason, we actually made this, was based on your recommendation a couple months ago, that when builders start a project, they would enter it as an application. It would go through.
I think that would be
the close it out, and then it basically would close out and it would become part of the database.
I think that would be the cat's meow system that is simple for builders and their clients to understand and get everybody on the same page. But we're now nibbling at like a very, very small component of that, and that small component on its own I don't think it makes a lot of sense.
So
right, like all we're hearing here is, oh, there's no way we're getting building codes. Oh, there's no way I can oversee that. Oh, there's no way we can inspect buildings. So there's no way that this really awesome cat's meow system is going to get created where we as builders with our clients can like enter into a piece of software building information, and it's going to spit out whether or not we're going to meet the code, and then we can close it out. Like if we're not going to get there, why are we?
Yeah, under B B1, it describes what you just described, Jason, because I thought that's what we all thought was a good idea. And this is sort of, this is shorthand for that system, which is what we're recommending, I thought. I thought it felt like there was consensus to have a system that would allow you to, at the beginning, determine whether your proposed design is going to meet code. You go through and you verify it at the end, and it gets loaded somewhere so that it takes the burden off of the towns to file it, and there's a central repository. There could be data that's captured, but it's a tool at the beginning to help you determine whether your building's going to meet it, and then at the end it verifies that you've done so.
That I support. I guess I didn't read B1. So make B1 clear that that's what that means. Okay. I'm reading it as establish a database, which basically is just, when I read that, what I see is a platform to file the Arby's certificates that nobody's doing.
Right. So,
and Richard, if I may, are you considering then that this actually, because I don't read it in B1 when I see that this is akin to like a res check up front, something like that, and then at the end you close it.
Yeah, that's what the couple paragraphs in the report talk about that system.
I was under B2.
I think some confusion might be caused by B2 has the wrong entity there. OPR has nothing to do with residential building certificates. So OPR takes care of builder registry. So and there is a confusion because this certificate could be about a builder being certified or a resident. So B2 should be DFS as well.
Somebody go.
So if I'm hearing that the suggestion is to file a permit application essentially with this piece and then come back later on and verify it, that wasn't what I was thinking at all. What I was thinking was a centralized database for people to post their RB certificates. I don't think I'm shocked that there is a builder in the world that would think that there was another permit process that makes sense. Act 250, local building permits. I mean, these things cost a huge amount of money. So, and we're in a housing crisis.
It's not a permit. It's a online, basically, we called it application for lack of a better word, but it's just entering it on the statewide database, and it would, in the process, it would tell you if you passed or failed.
Yeah, I would stop using the word. I would stop
There's
using the word database. I'd stop using the word database and replace it with tool. Right, that there's an online tool where housing data spec information can be inserted. It kind of go like an auto, build your own truck, right? When you go onto Chevy.com, and if you click something that doesn't meet, that is incongruous or doesn't meet a prescriptive requirement, it shoots you back a thing that says this doesn't meet the code. And so you have to check and slide the right bars and buttons to get an insulation and a mechanical package that says, yes, that will meet the prescriptive requirements of the code. And Matt, from a builder's perspective, right now, the way the current code works with this mix and match of prescriptive requirements and performance requirements and clients that don't care, it's really, really difficult for builders, because when we go back and we say, actually, that decision doesn't meet the code, I need to free up an extra $8,000 over here to do this. Can we cut your quartz countertop out? Like that puts builders as the bad guy. And versus a database, or not a database, a tool where you can sit with a client and go through and slide the bars to say, look, these aren't our choices. This is what's required. It makes it actually easier for the builders.
But we're gonna oppose it.
So when you're,
Yep.
People are visioning little, slightly different things, the.
Way outside of what we were charged to do, way outside of what we were charged to do.
So,
Yeah, so back to my original point then, if this is what Matt thought and actually what I said and why I started talking in the first place, if this is just B1 is establish a statewide database so we can just log RV certificates, I oppose it too.
So let's spell that out in the narratives. We really need to move on. I'm gonna trust Richard and Liz are taking notes. We're all taking notes.
We're recording, we'll have a transcript, but
Yeah, so we'll see in the next draft how we're trying to resolve this. And for the time being, say, let's just.
I'll just,
work our way
just to
through
put on record, depending on how the wording comes out, I would say DFS and PSC would likely have a dissenting opinion on these.
Sure.
But
okay,
it's a little confusing right now what it's been, what it's gonna say.
So Richard, will you work on sort of squaring up the narrative and then the way the bullets are expressed?
Yes, I'm not completely clear, but I'll work on it.
Right, well, the next iteration will help draw comments again. B2 and, one of tests. Establish certificate application process for both CVs and RVs, part of the database. Yeah, I was thinking this was, now I see, OPR is listed there, which
is a mistake.
But
That's not a thing, that's wrong.
It should be DFS.
Okay. Yeah, so for the moment, everything is DFS. And these are like other aspects of the very same sort of thinking I'm hearing, same kind of tool that Jason described, for instance. Update OPRs.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we are gonna oppose B2 the way that it's written. I don't understand why there would be a certificate application process for self attesting that you're following the RVs. I don't understand that. And it goes back to the B1 question is, now I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna give you an application. I'm building a custom home based on specs that I worked on with a client, and then we built in the RVs into that. And now I'm going to come, whether it's a computer program that I'm entering this into, or I'm handing it to a bureaucrat, that I have to wait, sorry, that I'm going to have to hope that they understand the plan that I gave them, rather than having knowledge and certifying that I've done that. Like, I think the problem that we talked about initially, and this addresses B1 and B2, was you've got some towns that hold the RV certificates, some towns that don't, some agencies that have a database, but we don't have a collection of all the certificates. And I think that was at the heart of my recommendation for a database or a file cabinet down here at PSD, is no one could, in the beginning of this, point to me and say, or any of us, and say, this is where all those are filed. That's different than me putting in an application in, getting approval, and then certifying afterwards. And that's what this contemplates, B1 and B2.
Right, and as you say that, it reminds me, I think, that we talked about, well, for instance, in real estate transactions, someone wants to sell, and I go, where's their certificate? If you got a central repository of certificates, it could be pulled up, maybe you just pull it up electronically, print it out. When I need proof of contractor's insurance, I can just get it for someone and print another one.
Yeah.
Okay. Different applications, really.
But I would just say with that, again, this is back to zooming out, big picture. The reason that realtors are asking for RV certificates at closings is because the rulemaking process over the last, since 1997, realizing that RVs and CBs weren't being followed, they threw out this little, they got this little hook that said, well, maybe we can make the real estate agents and their attorneys enforce Arby's for us. And so that's why they're being required at that level. If there was an actual code program, none of that needs to happen anymore, right? Like I'm going to use my gas certification. When I go to sell this house, the real estate closing attorney isn't asking me for a certification on the propane lines in the house. So I wouldn't, if we had an actual code program that was dealing with it in real time, there isn't need to then have the real estate agents. I just had a real estate agent reach out to me for a house that we built 18 years ago. And it was holding up the real estate transaction from 18 years ago because the client lost the Arby's certificate. Like, as we keep going through time and we keep thinking that that's just normal, and that's the way that Arby's is going to be enforced, it just gets so flippin' messy.
Well, they're going to do that likely anyway. You know, I have like almost 20 years of having been a real estate agent. And I know Peter Tucker's on the call as well, so I would defer to him. But what ends up happening in that world is that you're under your license, you owe a duty of care to the person that you're representing, whether it be the seller or the buyer. And as soon as they learn about something that could be a defect to the house, they're going to disclose that item, whether it's you're living next to the airport or the place floods on a regular basis. There's cases that realtors have had felt obliged to disclose that there are haunted houses. This is legitimately true. So whether there is a legal precedent or not, the realtors that know about the building energy standards, the good ones, are probably looking into that as part of their fiduciary relationship with their client.
The rolling rise, I don't know if there's.
I'm looking at that's 11:23 and we've got.
Yes.
Trying to figure out how we're going to get through this.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing we can do is for some of these that are coming, go to a sort of a higher level. For instance, on the training, workforce training and support. So let's try to close out B. But I'm not sure if we can because we have the three blind men and the elephant that going on. People see these words as really different things depending on their interest and what they're touching.
I mean, B could just be B in and of itself, and we contemplate it in another forum, whether it's the legislature or in a study group. But I think B makes sense, but the broke out parts then become the challenging part. And they're dependent upon other things happening.
You want to be two, certainly, it seems like, but B3 is a little different because it has to do with OPR's contract tenants.
Which aren't required though. So that's something that.
That's our requirement.
No, a contract is required, not using OPR's contract.
Oh, correct, correct.
And that really doesn't go under though, improving the process for filing and tracking energy code certificates. That has nothing to do with it. So maybe it can be pulled out elsewhere.
It's almost like a bill stuffer.
That was not.
It's like alerting people that there's.
Yeah, no.
It would provide a place for consumers to find out.
Let's just agree to move it somewhere else.
I think Matt's got an important point though. Somehow, again, this has got a little confusing over time. What happened is that legislature specified what language specifically has to be in those owner home builder contracts over $10,000. And there are very specific stipulations. So what this is saying is let's add that stipulation, of which OPR creates a template that builders are welcome to use. It goes through the stipulations.
Make filing certificates of town records and the notarization. That sounds like it's predicated on having this functional system that eliminates the need. I mean, otherwise it becomes redundant.
Senator Bray, before we go to C, may I correct the record? I heard back from ICC about those brick grants. Chris is correct. The major applicant has to be the state hazard mitigation officer. They call it the SHMO, chief hazard. And then the possible sub applicants are building and or fire prevention departments, a state code office or agency, or broadly any jurisdiction for other hazard mitigation planning or emergency management. In other words,
we're gonna spin that
Yep.
piece off.
I know, I just wanted to correct those, but thank you.
And I will just for the record, I did send to Richard and you language from the state hazard mitigation plan that actually talks about building code. So if you want to include that, mark the appendix of the report, it actually talks about doing a study on building code, residential building codes.
So, and if you were able to do B1 and B2 and the way it works, then B4 would make sense. So even the contingencies, I don't know that if we're voting it as a separate item. Okay, so C, workforce training and support. C1, we'll start with the highest level, coordinate, support energy code trainings and certifications. Anyone opposed to that?
Yes, sorry. This again changed the wording pretty significantly. Our point was to create a state agency with authority over to, not to perform all the training, but just to coordinate the details of the training so that they all tie together. OPR does not certify, they do not want to certify. So there's a difference between certifying the human being and registering the business. And so what was in the 11.9 language was name a statewide coordinating entity to oversee and support energy code trainings or certification. So the idea would be that whoever has authority over all of the buildings would also be, at least at the top, the coordinating authority for the certifications so they tie together. And that's seamlessly done now with electrical work and plumbing work in the state.
Next shop, does you
Yes,
go through that, their certifications.
right. So then all of these subpoints, C1, A, B, C, and D would make sense if EFG and EBT could be the primarily funding, producing, teaching entities, but they would be under the I wouldn't even want to say supervision, but under the oversight of a state agency, not just on their own. And that would ensure that things are uniform, because these are not the only two providers of education and certification in the state. Actually, nobody's does builder certification right now,
Will be
Other than-
BPI.
except for all of the
by
other,
January.
right. There's a number of third-party groups, but there's no one entity that says this is what qualifies as certification.
So until there's an AHJ, and how do we move forward with this?
Well,
It seems like can there be a temporary?
We could do our kick the can of just putting AHJ there, but the point is that somehow that language went missing. Because someone already, well, actually nobody really coordinates and supports, but we're saying the key thing was to have this authority.
So I think that C1 is good as written. I think that, and I've said it a lot of times, I think that the models that we're using for certifications exist already. In most cases, as Mike said on the phone, they are the ones that are approving and saying who can do their certification. Third-party licensing, it occurs the same over at OPR. Part of the OPR process for the residential contractors was to allow people to post voluntary certifications on their website. And that's part of the process that I believe that they're in right now with their advisory group, is defining what different, is it BPI? Is it NCCR? What are the different certifications that exist out there?
They're not doing that. Advisory group.
They should be, because
They're not doing that. And there's a problem of using specific. I think the idea would be to have a general certification that would be specific to Vermont.
No, I'm gonna oppose that, and I'm gonna say, if we're saying that OPR, who hired two pretty expensive attorneys, can't do that now, and they said that they could do it, and we're gonna go tell Mike that he's gonna have to do it, and he's telling you he can't do it, I just, it doesn't make any sense. And to require, and again, when you start talking about a required certification, the optics on it are pretty bad. If you recall back in the discussion that we had about registering contractors and what those contractors said when they came through the door, that they felt like they were trying to be pushed out of the market by people who had very specific interests. That's what we're going to come back to. That fleet of people will come back on this. So my point initially was, you've given me a book. It's not actually a very big book, the RVs. It's not big. You should be able to figure that out. And if you can't figure it out, you should be able to hire a trainer of your choice to train you and certify you. I have a hard time with, when we say I made myself clear at the last meeting that I felt like we had a bag of goods that we were sold, and we're back here this year now.
One. Coordinating for energy filtration certification.
Right.
What we mean by that in an operational level, and who does it, it's, there's devils in the detail.
We support that. I mean, we support, providing opportunities, identifying training firms. I mean, and that's something that the private sector, we're doing. And I'd invite anyone. I'm going to give a tour of our facility after this. If anybody wants to come by, I'm more than happy to have you over. But there are people that are already doing this stuff. Just like the realtors have their own training outfits, just like the attorneys go to theirs, just like the insurance agents go to theirs.
But we're not talking here about formal coordination, right? Are we talking like realtors and builders, Efficiency Vermont, EBA,
But when you say certify me to be able to do it, now you're going above and beyond the.
No, that's not a C1, where it just says coordinate and support energy code.
No, I agree with that. What I just disagree with is creating an entity to oversee a certification requirement. So you're essentially taking us away from the registration process right into licensing.
But that's not a C1, right?
And it's not required. They're talking about making it voluntary, but the point is that for electricians, fire safety says this is what a Vermont electrician needs to know. And anybody can teach the electrician, that you just have to meet our requirements. And then we accept the certificate that they took a course and we'll license the electrician.
And that's what OPR agreed to do. And so I'm going to hold them to that. We should hold them to that.
They didn't. They said they would list voluntary certifications on their website.
Okay, so.
They didn't say they were getting into the business.
So what you're saying then is that you do want an authority to license someone based on a certificate. Because a voluntary certification is what they said they'll do. If it's a mandatory certificate, then you're talking licensing.
Two things. One, there's what OPR is currently planning on doing. And then there's also what OPR could do if so directed.
So Matt, are you saying that you would be supportive of someone in and of themselves getting some sort of training that might follow some criteria like BPI or whatever, and that would be up to them? And if Builder A wants to do that, that's fine. If Builder B doesn't want to do that, that's up to them. And in terms of the consumer knowing whose services they're purchasing, it might be that they find that out on the OPR website, that Builder A has a BPI certification and Builder B doesn't.
Correct.
And would you be opposed to DFS, who currently does this for electricians and other trades, to say this is that for instance, a BPI certification training meets what we think you need to know to successfully apply the RBs and the CBs?
So that's where you lose me. So when you say to me that I have to take a certification to prove to the agency that I can do my job, that then becomes licensure without calling it licensure. So when you apply, and that was the whole where I keep going back to the bag of goods or whatever, was when we went through and we came around to supporting the residential registration piece because it was supposed to be the first step that, first of all, brought everybody under the 10. So that once everybody was under the 10, then OPR could say, you have to do Arby's, and it's on you to figure that out. And if you want to go and get a certificate from BPI or another firm, they will post that certificate. They're going to have to approve they're not going to just let you put Honest Matt's building certificate up there. They'll want to verify who the certificates that they're putting out are, but it's not a requirement to do the work. The requirement falls under your license as a registration as a builder to comply with state law. So that was what we bought. That was what we understood, was that OPR process that we set up was to bring people out of this, because really the problem that we're trying to face here, no offense to government, was this was not rolled out very well to the contractor community. That the compliance with Arby's has less to do with, and I'm sorry, I disagree with, if someone's losing a bid because someone's asking them to break the law and then they're watching somebody else break the law and they're not reporting it, that's on the industry. But that whole piece that people are not compliant, the majority of it is they have no idea that Arby's exists. They have no idea that the builder registry exists. So it's not a function of people being stupid or being arrogant, not wanting to do it. It's a function of we've sort of failed them because as we've rolled out the Arby's over the years, there hasn't been marketing or discussion or action from the state that someone would know. So that was what I thought we tried to accomplish last year. And that's why I get a little prickly when we start talking now about creating requirements, was that should have been part of that conversation, because it's all the same players at the table. So why weren't we talking that way last year? And now it's become convoluted.
I think my sense is in part people proceeded in good faith last year. And now they're seeing, well, what did it actually turn out to be? And it's like, okay, that's not what we thought. So my gut reaction is correct what we have before building another piece. Because who knows how much more satisfied we might be with what it's achieving a year from now if those steps were. A whole contracting community. I know another one. And no one knows, I'm batting 0 when I say, have you registered as a contractor? They go, well, yeah, I've registered with the Secretary of State. And I said, not your business as a business, but you yourself as a contractor. It's been used to every single contractor I've talked to.
So no offense to state agencies.
No,
they don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
If that's not more evident.
Thank you so much.
So we support training.
So I just want to say, I don't think in the matrix or in the narrative is requiring certification. And the only thing that we talked about, and I agree with Matt, that we were talking about the builder registry, we were not talking about requiring credentials or certification or anything like that, that we were deliberately avoiding that. So what we talked about in the course of these meetings was just including raising the profile of Arby's for both contractors and consumers by including some kind of checkbox or button or flag or something on the website that says, for contractors who are registering, yes, I understand there's Arby's and they're required. And for consumers, contractors acknowledge that.
That's jumping down to D4.
That's D4.
Okay.
So that's that's all we've talked about recommending. And it's not, I suppose there is a legislative component to that because we might need to be more explicit about what we're asking the parent to do.
And this is actually coming out of a conversation Jim Bradley and I went to last summer with OPR. And they said they would prefer that there were available a general certification for builders and not specific different.
But we're not requiring.
Exactly, never. No one is talking about, it has been down the line, voluntary.
Certification or registration?
Certification is voluntary. Registration is the baseline that's required. But the idea would be to develop a generic base voluntary certification. And that would, it makes, all we're trying to say is it makes sense that that entity is tied in with what the building codes are and establishes what the requirements for that generic certification are around what is actually in Vermont, rather than a national certification.
The thing that we cover the territory, but we're also gonna have public comment. So there's a bunch of details, in C1, 218 through 6. So I'd like to put on pause for a moment and just talk about D. So
Senator Bright,
yes.
may I just point out there's 2 words missing in C4. Increase and coordinate trainings for weatherizers. Otherwise, it's repetitive. Excuse me for interrupting.
Just to talk about D in general terms, that all these things are about increasing awareness. These are things that you don't end up legislating, like, bid stuffers, things like that.
Except for
D4 is the one that the builders are completely against.
What?
Against D4.
Just certifying that you are. And why would that? I'm surprised. I thought.
They let the builders speak, but it's quote a noose around their necks without everything else being in place. It's not required for any other profession. And they can't, they're having to certify things that they can't control.
Yeah, I mean, my objection to that was that it's empty, right? And it's just there's nothing. We have no system behind it. There's no as everything we're talking about. There's no certifications. There's no trainings. There's no inspections. There's no program. There's nothing actually behind it, and this just ends up being more likely to kind of weaponize against the builder for not knowing that they didn't build to the code, because there's nothing behind it that, with some other language that's in the legislation to come after a builder to basically go back and fix somebody's house that they built 8 years ago where they missed a code requirement of another place where they checked a box that said, no, you are responsible for this because you said you knew about this.
Well, regardless, you're responsible for it.
Yeah, it's a law.
Well, so the point is,
This is to promote understanding that there's such thing. And if having worked with OPR for a long time, real estate agents make mistakes on forms a lot, and they don't pull your license because you made a mistake on the form. If you willfully didn't follow the rules, they're going to pull your license. But if you built a house for someone, if you say to OPR, yes, I understand that there is a standard and I agree to follow it, and you make a mistake, that's a mistake. You're not gonna you're in more trouble with the customer attorney than you are with OPR.
Yeah.
If you maliciously don't follow the code, they'll take care of it.
I guess my point. I guess my point was more about, and Matt, this actually goes back to stuff you were talking about before. Of why are we focusing on adding check boxes to a registry that nobody's using anyway?
It's the law.
So we're trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out how to make this go better.
Yeah, that's, I mean, all due respect, if we go that route, then, we might as well like go home.
Just give up. Yeah, right.
So we're saying.
Well, I mean, that's kind of my,
Just
I mean,
saying-
that's kind of my playing chicken game, is to point out how really kind of ridiculous the whole thing is. We're truly trying to have our cake and eat it too, by wanting energy codes, but not doing anything that's behind it to enact energy codes.
But I don't. Kelly and Richard can speak, others can speak more knowledgeably about this, but we have like the Energy Excellence Network and trainings, and there are, my sense is there's not a coordinated program yet of the scale and scope that people would like to really do this well, but that there are people making genuine efforts to do it. And I thought part of the attraction of this was for someone like you, Jason, that when you build to code, but others don't, that puts you at a competitive disadvantage in the marketplace. So the checkbox was, my understanding, the intent was always that you're going to make sure that other people knew that they had that obligation, whether they chose to meet it or not. At least they were informed that they were following or not an energy code, and that's actually a good legal status for business to be in. But those who step up will, there'll be a way for people to know that you're one of the people that have stepped up.
There may be a semantics thing here, though, because this wording says include a contractor commitment checkbox to comply with. And some of what Jason has said earlier is that I know the code, I've explained to my client what the code is, but they decided to put in quartz countertops instead of the ERV. And I can't control that. And what am I supposed to do? Who do I go to say, I have a contract. I told the state I'm going to comply with the code, but my client doesn't want to do it. So maybe it might be acceptable that if this checkbox says, I understand there's a code, and instead of committing to comply with the code, because they sometimes can't control the client. Well, that, for instance, that doesn't happen to CBs. Yeah. If I say to my client, the CB says you've got to do this, and DF, we have to get a permit, we have to sign off on that. The builder has to sign off that they actually built it according to the way we designed it. My client can't say, I don't want to put that installation in. They can't say that to me. But in a residential contract, they apparently can say that and do that, and a builder would then be building something not complying with code that he checked a box and said, I will comply with code.
But that's like
having that notification on the website also gives the builder something to point the consumer to.
Exactly.
To say,
exactly,
we have to follow an energy code. It says so right here.
Right.
And so yeah, we have to give you those quartz countertops.
Well,
we have to also insulate the building.
So the argument that's being made here is very similar to the again law that I had to follow as a real estate agent before. It is that if all of a sudden I went into your property, and you're not a racist, but if you said to me, Matt, I don't want you bringing any African Americans into my house, or I'm going to go to agent XYZ, I can't take you as a client, and I should probably be reporting agent AB. So it's kind of not a fair narrative to say that because I'm either forced to break the law or lose a client, that means you need to find better clients.
Right. Well, that's true, but some of this I think happens long after you've signed the contract. So you get down the road and somebody says, geez, I really like those quartz countertops. Just following up on this analogy, and you've already signed a contract that says you're going to do this, and the client just refuses to pay for it. They won't pay for that ERV that's required by code. So, but they will pay for quartz counters. So what do you do in that situation? I guess you have a dispute with your client and you say, I'm not gonna take, I don't know.
I've had plenty of disputes with clients, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. And that's, I keep coming back to responsibility here. The responsibility isn't on the legislature or a department for an industry to stand up and act appropriately.
Yeah, no,
Or educate themselves. And that's kind of, that's why I have a hard time with that. And we can move on because it's moot, but that argument doesn't work with me.
Let's, because we are, low, I know we'd like to stay. We are gonna run out of time. So let's just, pause. And it's been helpful to hear the back and forth. And just pull ourselves on where we are. So anyone who, we use the same system. If you were dissenting on D4, please, speak up.
Sandy.
Andy, okay.
Are we opposing? I oppose.
Is that Jason?
Jason.
Yes.
Got it? Okay.
Jim, are you on or is Colin working for you now or speaking for you now?
I'm on.
Okay. Great. So
I would oppose as well.
Okay.
So.
And this is Mike, I would oppose as well too.
Okay.
Everybody's gonna provide, dissenting opinion,
Short,
short,
couple sentences.
yes, couple
Okay.
sentences, two
All right.
sentences.
Great. So thank you. Let's just touch base on the last sections, the increased support of and funding for base code and above base code compliance. That's really about the energy efficiency utilities. So
Just a clarifying
Yes.
question. On the other ones in B and then I think this one in E, did we make a decision of not necessarily having to have them be separate because they're not things that need legislative action and not have to vote on them, or?
I honestly is passing over voting because it's obviously people have a lot to say. So I was trying to hit things that seem more critical so we could finish them out while we're still here. I don't increase funding. I don't know if that's a recommendation of this group or not.
I don't know how we're gonna get some of these things done, like build a database or do additional training and outreach or without funding.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
this, what
so-
the E specifically says increase support of and funding, and it's specific to the EEUs. So it's not generally just about increasing funding. So again, this might be a place where the synopsis of the recommendation from the committee doesn't quite match what the language in the report is, but the PSD wouldn't agree just blanketly to increase EU funding for this. As I said before, we're having a process to review new construction programs as part of the demand resource planning process. So I think that's where that look and overview belongs, not at the legislature. That's my opinion.
So let's corral the non-legislative actions into a set or pull forward, whatever it is. It is going to be a legislative report. So let's move and pull forward ones that are recommendations about things that might happen in 2024. And then follow that way, because there's things where clearly where people have to, the more we talk about that, there's another layer to the onion, and that's okay. So F, coordinate code compliance grants in Vermont.
I don't think that, I don't think we need that.
Okay,
That's
charge 3, evaluation of cost effectiveness. This is actually ongoing. I
I
don't
had
know.
some comment on this.
Yeah.
We've just established that they're absolutely not cost effective. Well, when we're talking about the program, so evaluate the cost effectiveness of the RBs and CBs. So are we about, if we're evaluating this on money spent to comply with the RBs and CBs, if we go here, we're going the wrong direction on the climate. If we're spending money on new houses that are coming in and being built with the latest Energy Star equipment, with the latest equipment that's out there, with the latest insulation, with the latest building techniques, and we're forgetting about the 120,000 homes over here that are actually bleeding carbon into our atmosphere as we speak, that makes this not cost effective. The cost effective spend would be on these homes over here that are actually wasting the fuels.
Yeah, it depends on the definition of cost effective.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Matt on that one, that it kind of is, if the focus and the goal is climate and energy, to continue to increase the cost of new construction, which even without an energy code built today is significantly better than any of the existing housing stock, you're really missing the point and you're looking at the wrong thing, right? The real problems out there are the 99% of existing homes that people live in.
Agreed, but this committee is focused on new constructions. Yeah.
Well, but it's again, to Matt's point about the definition of cost effectiveness, is it cost effective to continue to push and raise the bar on this really, really narrow band of construction? And in a bigger picture, is it actually doing more harm than good by getting fewer of new houses built, because they're to the point where they're so expensive, only handfuls of second home buyers can build them.
So is this the question that establishing a new committee needs to dive into and address?
Yeah.
So there sounds like there might be support for that one at least.
So I don't want to come off like I'm opposing or saying that we should turn off the CBs and RBs. That's not my point. My point is everything that we've done in this working group raises the cost of what we're trying to do. Not a little bit. You're talking $50 to $100 million. When I look at some of I think the rolling things out slowly, if we're on that band, working with the systems that we built already to put this together, applying some responsibility on industry to follow up with that work, and creating a training and notification process so everybody knows that, that's cost effective.
And what must be part of the cost-effective argument, or I should say review, is the fact of how cost-effective is it to build a building improperly, appoint it improperly because of the lack of understanding, and then it fails prematurely, and you've got to rebuild it, and you've made the building sick, the people sick, and that cost is, it's hard to measure that, but my gosh, that is happening, and that's what I was wanting to be part of this committee for, that very reason, to prevent those eventualities from happening that I'm seeing more and more frequently.
Craig has his hand up, but unless I just wanted to make sure my brain is not broken on this. When I read the law, the code, it doesn't just say new construction. It's also modifications to exist. I mean, it covers a lot of ground. So I know that a lot of the conversation's been around building new homes, but that's not.
It's also defined very clearly in statute. So cost effectiveness in this context is different than what we're talking about. I mean, I'm agreeing with a lot of what's being
Right. I just
said.
want to make sure I understood this was not just about new homes, the way this is supposed to be applied.
Correct.
Okay.
My fault.
But that's if it's a substantial change to the home. It's not just if I want to go change out like for like in new place. It's if I'm doing an addition or I'm.
Well, if you're doing anything that changes the energy use. Yeah.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot.
Let's go to Craig.
Yeah, I know we're out of time. Just quickly, I think the last bullet's extremely important, that we look at the cost of carbon and how we look at that. I couldn't agree more that the existing housing stock is critical in how we look at that. However, the cost of carbon is a real factor, and I think we really haven't addressed it head on to make all of our decisions based on $3.50 oil when our state capital is completely flooded. I couldn't agree more that what you guys are saying is true, but I think we can do both. And I actually think we're pretty close on where we need to get to. to meet the comprehensive energy plan. And I think most of this discussion has been around how to train people where the code already is 80% of the issue. And it's not going to involve massive amounts of more insulation, but I do think it's critical that we come up with a rational approach to the cost of carbon. And not only do I support it, I think we should move that up so that the legislature addresses it next year in 2024.
Colin,
Thank you. Real quickly, I think this last point is a wonderful illustration of why we need one person, one entity in charge, because last year, as we came down the wire towards LCAR, the requirement for R10 exterior continuous sheathing got moved down to R5 continuous sheathing to address the cost of the upgrade to the RVs. In my opinion, the building science behind R5 continuous exterior insulation is not a good idea. It was not the one that was proposed throughout the process, but got approved at the end. And so at some point, we got the tail wagging the dog. We don't have somebody looking at this whole thing holistically to figure out if this makes sense. It goes back and speaks to the may instead of shall, and making sure that we have well thought out or approaches that happen all the way through. That last minute change, I think, is fraught with unintended consequences. And I think it was highlighted by the fact that we were trying to meet some mythical cost effectiveness here. And the biggest point from the beginning of this is the existing homes are contributing a lot more than the new homes, and continuing to ratchet up the dial on these new homes from a cost effectiveness standpoint makes little sense. Thank you.
I just want to make sure I understand. Is there anyone dissenting with the first bullet there? Continue calculating energy code cost effectiveness as it's been done historically. So there's been a process Department uses. Is anyone saying no, don't do it that way anymore? Okay, so we're fine there. And then is there anyone opposing the notion that we should have a committee that addresses, and I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud, that we need a way to resolve, to research and address how we, it could be, I don't know that I'm not imagining it as a separate committee. We've talked about like 3 different sorts of working groups to help solidify things. This to me sounds like support for the notion that amongst the things that such a committee would address would be the cost effectiveness issues. So
it would be presumably be a committee of economic and housing and energy experts. Yeah.
The PSD doesn't support it if we're named as the entity, but.
Well, there's a question right there.
Having fun with
There's
this.
no name entity for anyone dissenting though with the idea of having this capacity to figure this out. So
I would disagree with this until other industries are also starting to account for carbon and not energy benefits in their cost calculations.
You don't even think there should be a committee to.
Well, why would there be a committee why would I study it if I don't think we should be doing it until other industries are doing the same?
we are. I mean, well, I'm not going to get debating. I'm not well equipped to debate on this question. I'm just aware from work on the energy efficiency utilities that the social cost of carbon is part of the math that figures out whether or not an energy efficiency utility measure meets the test of being an acceptable measure. And I know in the discussions on the renewable energy standard that's currently underway and being revisited, so only possibly reformed, that social cost of carbon has been a major consideration for it. Now you know what things really cost, sort of really cost in the
It's probably worth mentioning that there's a difference between cost effectiveness from the consumer's point of view and cost effectiveness on a project level and cost effectiveness on a program or sort of aggregate level. And
Societal
also
level.
at society level, and also what the purpose of those different calculations is.
So if anyone,
Okay.
sorry, I'm sorry. So if anyone has a caveat or opposes that, just, add that into your dissenting, the letter of dissenting ideas. I hate calling it that, but I think that's what we're calling it today.
Our two groups spent a significant amount of time looking at the last draft. I know we cannot cover it today, but this is also the last chance to discuss it. Just very briefly, we are concerned that this idea of a single authority, it seems to be broken down in the current version. Also, we strongly believe that the rate of compliance should be, some of our discussion should move up out of the appendix up into the main body, which we gave our edits about that. And the other thing that was relegated to the appendix almost entirely was building failures. And we feel that's a very strong segue between what's going on now and what needs to happen to increase compliance. So we would like more in the body about building failures. Thank you.
It's authorized by you. I'll work with Richard and try to be sort of a fair umpire, referee, and how we move things in. And, but I think we'll make sure that no one feels like their voice was overrisen to, in the process of coming up with a final report. Is the dissenting opinions, you have the ability to speak directly to readers and those, so that people have a sense of range of thoughts. Okay, so let me just check in. I know we are over. I appreciate people sticking around. I just do want to really make sure that we ask, is there a member of the public on this call that wanted to speak with us today? So hearing none. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.
And we're convening the Tuesday.
Next meeting is the 28th. Thank you.
At least it's Friday.
Is it
Virtual
9:30?
only, virtual only, so no driving. around.
Okay.
Okay, so
And it's only scheduled for 2 hours. Hard time getting through 2 hours. Hopefully we'll be.
yeah, so thanks. Today was a little bit